Good evening and happy Monday, and welcome to State of the Union on the Culture Network. I'm your host, Kimble, the founder and CEO of the Financial Services Innovation Coalition. I'm also the executive director of the Southern Christian Leadership Global Policy Initiative. Tonight, I have the great pleasure of talking with my guest, Attorney Arthur Sidney. He's a policy expert and an academic. And tonight, we are going to talk about all things AI and the impact it will have on our future, and what we need to be doing to get ahead of that onslaught and make sure we don't lose ground. So, Arthur, thanks for coming on tonight. You're on mute.
Thank you, Kevin, for having me. It's an honor and a pleasure to be on here talking about this topical issue of AI. And I want to just center the conversation. I know that there's a lot of fear mongering about AI. I think there are a lot of opportunities if harnessed appropriately. And I want to talk about some of that. And also, not to say that everything is going to be quixotic and Valhalla. There are other things that we, in particular, in the Black community, ought to be cognizant of. But I think it's a great opportunity. I think if we harness the power of it, get in early, start adopting and having a seat at the table, it could be very bountiful for us. And I know that there have been reports talking about displacement of jobs, et cetera, and we'll talk about that more. But I'm very excited to talk about this as AI permeates every aspect of our life, right? So when you're applying to jobs, AI is involved with resume screenings and the like. Healthcare, AI is used to diagnose diseases early. Even with surveillance matters, which we know have disproportionately affected African American and other minority communities with a disparate impact, negative impact. But everything from education to the way we play, the way we work, the way we enjoy our daily life is affected by AI. And I think it's so important that we start talking about this, not just from a policy perspective, which is important, and that's my background, but also from an ownership perspective. So some of the things that you and I have talked about in prior conversations, how do we ride this wave? You know, you'll recall 20, 30 years ago, we had the dot-coms and there was a big bust. And now in the news, they're talking about, is AI going to bust? Mm-hmm. And I'll just share this and I'll be quiet. I'm very excited about this. But as there is consolidation in the marketplace, you're seeing, big investments in open AI and other platforms. I see consolidation, but I see consolidation for the benefit of consumers. AI is making things more efficient. You get answers more efficiently, correctly, sometimes. It really helps with employment and making decisions. And so one of the things that's beneficial about AI, and tell me, jump in. I mean, I don't,
No. Okay, yeah, go ahead. I've got a question, but you're feeding me. I've got a million questions, so go ahead.
Okay. One of the things that's beneficial about AI, it allows smaller companies to scale, allows them to get entry into the marketplace. For example, now there are lower barriers to entry. If somebody wants to do coding, you don't know one iota about coding, you can type in a regular language way to an AI platform and have it develop code for you. And that is one pathway to the new collar class, right? So we had the blue collar, the white collar. I know there's discussion about displacement of blue collar and even white collar workers. Now we have the new collar worker. And I think that's where the conversation tonight and going forward should be focused upon. How do we get in place where we, who are often left behind, how do we catch it right on this train that's already moving to make sure that we're part of the new class and are not left behind? And these conversations, Kevin, we're not just having here in the States. I had it most recently in October when I was in Uganda. And very surprising to me is how forward-thinking some of the AI frameworks are in the continent. They're one of the continent's biggest resources, and I wrote an article about it on LinkedIn.
I think we have it up. Tracy, can you pull up the article?
which reference my reflections upon being at the GAME conference, which was the international conference in Uganda.
The other one, Tracy, not that one, the other one. Go ahead, Arthur. Go ahead.
Sure, which was the conference in Uganda talking about AI and its impacts. They too are having a similar conversation. They are concerned and want to make sure that they don't miss the AI wave as they have in prior iterations of financial institutions and other Western formulated things. And so I wrote an article about ways and opportunities to lessen the North-South debate and Gulf when it comes to AI. So one of Africa's greatest assets as a continent is that it is inordinately young. Right. They don't have a lot of older people. I'm generalizing, but it's a fact. You can Google and fact check me in real time. They have more folks under 35 years old in Africa because of the prior booms in youth. And so these young people who are in university, they have a thirst and a knowledge and a curiosity and want to be engaged on AI principles generally, wanting to understand frameworks. And then, as I mentioned or started to mention and didn't finish the thought, is that throughout Africa, in Southern Africa, East Africa, the continent is developing frameworks for AI regulation and governance, which, by the way, puts them ahead of the U.S. in many regards, right? Because I wrote another article talking about how at the federal level in the United States, we don't have a uniform or a unified AI framework. There has been a struggle with a lot of our technological legislation. For example, we don't have a uniform privacy law, which undergirds AI, right? So the information that's being put into these large language models, there are privacy concerns as to what data is put in there, who owns the data, how the data is used, and whether I, as a consumer, whether I can get access to it, and so on. So not only is the United States, do we not have a federal framework when it comes to privacy, we don't have a federal framework when it comes to AI. And so increasingly what you're seeing is the states are moving and acting. And so that's causing difficulty and uncertainty for businesses and other consumers because nobody wants a patchwork of state laws. Right. Generally, in the legal realm, the government or the feds provide a floor of rights. And so we don't even have a floor that we're discussing. And so what's happening in the meantime with the president that we have, as active as he is, not to politicize the conversation. However, everything in Washington is political, but I'm depoliticizing this to the extent practicable. The president is operating in the Gulf and is ruling by executive order, or rather is trying to allay or prevent the states from going forward with AI regulation. And so he has, through several executive orders since January, and the latest, he said probably about 7 or 8 of them, approximately, each one has tried to centralize power in the federal government for procurement and other modalities to make sure that the U.S., which is in a existential race with China to attain AI superiority by 2030, to make sure that the U.S. achieves that role and achieves that goal. The problem with the president and what he's doing, just related to AI, is that executive orders don't have the force of law. Mm-hmm. And so, particularly when it comes to consumer protection and well-being, that is constitutionally protected by the states and the federal government. And so, executive order is not a law. The legislative branch is there for a reason. They make laws. The executive branch enforces them. And so, even though he has an executive order stating that he is going to preempt the states from acting, it's going to play out for many years in the court. Because it just doesn't have the force of law. So I've shared a lot. I think those are some of the opportunities. Those are some of the threats. I can share generally, if you'd like, some of the concerns people have with AI. Right. So talk generally about some of the boons and benefits of AI, how it's going to make things, democratize access to things, how it's going to provide modalities and pathways to the middle class. I've talked about how you can do things more efficiently, more effectively.
Excuse me.
How you can make money from this. All positive things. Some of the negative things that people have talked about are that they're going to be displaced. AI is so efficient, it's so good, it's going to displace not just white collar workers, but even the downstream effects that'll displace blue collar workers.
We have an article. Tracy, can you pull up that article about the job loss? Go ahead. Go ahead, Arthur.
Sure. And there's even discussion about young people wanting to get in more skilled jobs, technical jobs, so that they don't get displaced, because this is this fear mongering and concern that people have. And I want to share that with AI, with guardrails in place, it's not a matter of job displacement. It's a matter of the jobs that are remaining, who gets them, and how are people trained to retain and obtain jobs. So there may be displacement, but it's really fundamentally the conversation in AI is really about opportunity. It's about access. It's about power.
So, Arthur, I'm gonna jump in here.
Yeah.
When it comes to the job loss question, one of the things, it's, people are laying off workers, and people are very expensive for corporations. And there was a whole long conversation about corporations not wanting, like, they're investing tons in AI, but nothing in people. So is it really, fear mongering to just like during when we did the trade deals back in the 90s, everyone said, well, it's fear mongering, it's going to be replaced, but there really was displacement that we never recovered from. So, I mean, can we really just ignore the job loss?
And I think that's a great that's a great analogy, just like what happened in the 90s, even prior, with each trade iteration, whether it's the 1940s, 1948, Bretton Woods and the GATT, and later on 1994, 95 with the WTO, and then even with NAFTA in 95, there was a concern of displacement, and inevitably there are cycles to labor markets. People do get displaced, but then what happens is people retool, they retrain, and they get back into the labor market. And so one of the things that needs to happen, in particular in the Black community, is if we can move forward and get AI curriculum in grades 1 through 12, get the teachers ready to teach AI, get the students ready. I mean, fundamentally, that may sound quixotic because we still realize there's still a digital divide, right? We just came out of the pandemic. Nay, some would even argue we're still in the pandemic. And one of the things that happened to Black and brown and other minority communities is that they were behind with respect to, even today, broadband access, having access to computers, and other essential things that made living, working, playing, and even going to church possible. And so those are, AI will, to an extent, exacerbate some of the extant problems, structural problems that are there. It is not going to be a panacea, right? We have had job displacement. We've been underemployed when it comes to employment. And so AI is going to exacerbate some of those problems at a faster clip. And so one of the ways to ameliorate and address those kinds of problems are to focus on, one, education, which is things we can do now, share with people the opportunities for growth and ownership opportunities. So
what does that mean? What does that explain?
Sure.
Growth opportunity.
And so even, we are so often reluctant to use, stocks and investments. But one of the things that we can do, those that have the means, support entrepreneurs of your choice, whether they're minority or whatever, support founders to allow them to scale their companies. I think that's so incredibly important to make sure that they are able to move at the clip that they need to upscale and move into some of these frontier AI communities. And so,
so let me ask you this, just as a practical matter.
Sure.
I mean, how does if you're African American, if you're a minority or African American, let's say African American in this space, how do you get to that place? I mean, obviously we know the numbers are horrible in terms of access to capital or access to investment opportunities or investments in minority African American businesses. So is that really an option? I mean, are we, how does that work practically?
I think we've got to make a concerted effort. I mean, our community is not bereft. We do, as we know, I don't have the figure, but we do an inordinate amount of spending. We're, I think we can all agree we spend a lot on things that we like: clothes,
cars,
fine liquor, all of the things. I don't want to enumerate all the myriad things, but one of the things that we haven't been doing as much of is having sort of a structural and sort of paradigm shift in our minds, in the sense of helping ourselves. The whole idea of self-help, that was extant in Tanzania in the 60s and 70s. I think we need to be very cognizant of that, and so. Not going too far afield of the conversation, I think we need to, because we have people that are skilled and trained. Howard University has a number of AI pilot programs that are going on now, where they're training students in AI entrepreneurship and investment and founding, as do other HBCUs. And so there is the brain power. I think we need to then, as individuals, do a mind shift and start investing in these individuals, because AI is not going to bust. It's here for the future because of the scale of its efficiencies. That was one of the questions that's always been raised generally: is AI going to end anytime soon? And I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not a psychic friend, but it is going to be here for the foreseeable future.
I actually want to spend a little time on this, if you don't mind, because we go through these conversations in general, like people get into business, but I always go back. You remember when cannabis they were first legalizing cannabis, right? And there were tons of African Americans who went to jail selling cannabis when it was illegal. Then they couldn't get a license once it was legal. They're not available. So, how do we keep the AI from being the next cannabis situation where African Americans get nothing in that process?
So I think there's several modalities. One is the ownership. So drilling down on that, supporting owners already, supporting founders in AI is critically important so that they can grow. And then 5, I think there's also a 5-fold approach. Okay. So I'm going to obviously advocate for federal lobbying on these issues to put guardrails in place. Guardrails, what those guardrails entail? They would entail such things as mitigating bias, in the large language models and in the outputs that come from therefrom. How do you mitigate bias? Well, you do risk assessments. You can do human contact and audits, frequent audits of the output, explanation of how the data came through. I mean, that's one of the things that the Congress has introduced a number of laws upon, and that is getting bias out of the system. But no one really talks about concretely how do you do it. So those are just some examples of how you get bias out of the system. But more importantly, so advocating with Congress is one leg. 2, at the state level, since I mentioned that the states are operating in this lane, perhaps at a further clip than, not perhaps, they are operating a much quicker clip than the Congress is, whether it's in New York or California. Even get this, Governor DeSantis has, you may have seen in the headlines, he has this very pro-consumer looking bill, which tries to get at bias, protecting teens, and all kind of other beneficial things that Democrats would typically support. Right. And of course, we know, and it's very comprehensive. We know that the devil is in the details, right? And we also know, again, this town is political, whether you support DeSantis or not. The election's coming about, in 3 years. And so, these individuals in California and New York want to have something to talk about that's forward thinking, that will give them a base and a means to draw people to their platform. So one part of the goal is the federal the federal piece. The second part is activations at the state level. And then the third piece is what you do at FSIC and the other institutions and civic organizations that you're involved in is civic advocacy, right? Because if you are not represented by a group or an association that has your interest at heart, one of the ways that you can get active is have civic organizations petition on your behalf and also elevate the concerns that you have. And the concerns are going to be where the harm is, where are the pain points. And so you mentioned job displacement. You mentioned getting left behind potentially when it comes to education. And getting a piece of the financial pie, as has occurred in other areas, whether it's the first .coms that we are aware of in our lifetime, the only other .com, right? And with cannabis by analogy. And so Congress and the agencies at both the state and federal level need to act, but our voices, my voice, becomes amplified if I can coalesce with a civic organization. That brings more gravitas, right? So we have more organizations than just the Urban League and the NAACP, but those are examples of the kind of civic organizations that I'm referring to. There's also public. There's a ton of them. I don't want to name anyone for fear of leaving anyone out, but that amplifies my lonesome voice in the dark. And then I think also, as I mentioned, supporting entrepreneurs, supporting capital, making sure they have access to capital. So that also involves our financial institutions, our minority financial institutions, our Black institutions, making it limiting the red tape, so to speak, such that entrepreneurs and coders and such can get access to capital to help them go forward. And then fifth is a piece that we don't often talk about in our conversations, is to elevate the conversation. As I told you, there's a lot of things going on in Africa. Africa is not alone. Azerbaijan, there are other countries around the world that are trying to move to more normative frameworks. And I think that the other goal is to then elevate the conversation to the UN, which doesn't enforce U.S. law, but you're raising the profile of some of these frameworks so that there can be an international sort of buy-in, right? And that ties into African Americans getting left behind. That also ties into the global South getting left behind, because drawing the through thread to where I first started, just because Southern Africa and East Africa have these very detailed frameworks, maybe more detailed than ours, protecting copyright, protecting name, image, and likeness at the state level, and protecting privacy. Yeah. If it's not in line with what the North has, because again, as I told you and shared with you, it's really about opportunity, access, and power. Yeah. And so the North has power. And so as detailed as the South's frameworks are, the North will just carry on business without them. Right. And so that's why it's so critically important that this global South work together to develop these frameworks rather than do it scattershot or by themselves. So, South Americans saying, oh, no, we got our South American problems. And then the people on the African continent saying, oh, we've got our problem. I think the South needs to reunite on some of these things. Because one of the ways also, and I'll shut up and let you ask more questions, one of the ways to democratize AI is to use what is called autochthonous data. Okay. And what I mean by that.
How do you spell that word? How do you spell that word?
Autochthonous. Now I can say it, but can I spell it? It's a different question. Let me Google it. Autochthonous. AUTOCHTONOUS. Maybe.
Close enough. All right.
You have to Google that. But essentially what it means is, so here, just like with the previous paradigms, you mentioned the trading systems in cannabis, we use someone else's language rather than have our own. Mm-hmm. And so in the continent, for example, there are, I'll just say within Kenya, there's 52 different languages minimum in the country. And so in order for the language models to work at the local level using the indigenous language, you have to have the data from those from those ethnic groups. And moreover, they have to get hopefully they will have the rights to it, where they're getting, compensated and remunerated for that. When AI uses local dances, whether it's kamba dances from Kenya or whatever, that's all someone's intellectual property. Someone should be getting paid for that. That's a different conversation. But these are ways to democratize the diffuseness of the opportunity and the power that is extant in AI. I think these communities, our communities, need to make it our own. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned earlier how the AI has provided low barriers to entry for people to become entrepreneurs. As you've seen, and as I've mentioned, people are doing coding, people are making movies with certain platforms that I want to say that I'm not trying to advocate for one platform or another, but right. It allows the creative community now to have access to capital and not capital, have access to tools that they wouldn't have had otherwise, which can then lead them to capital. And we're seeing that happen even now. And that is why I'm suggesting that if young people in this country, or not just young, workers are trained in the use of AI, I think while some traditional jobs may get displaced automatically, there are also opportunities for additional jobs that heretofore were closed off to those communities, whether it's filmmaking, whether it's music making, as we had a conversation prior, whether it's making art.
Right. So let me there's several pieces to this. Like, I think AI. So I do agree with you. AI is not going. I mean, I think AI is the future. I mean, once the technology starts, it just rolls. So the question is, just like with cannabis or anything else, the question is, how do you become involved? But it seems like we have several structural problems in America that we have to address to do any of the things you're talking about. So one, investment in education. Like, we have no investment in education, right? People can't get retrained for any jobs as it is now. Education is hugely expensive. I mean, I don't, if you're, $60,000, $70,000 a year tuition for a decent college. So when we're talking about lobbying or Congress or policy at the state level, I mean, should that be where this, they talk about what free, community college tuition or whatever, free. Is that where we should be focusing some of this? Because we're African Americans make up less than 1% of most of the high wage jobs. So we're not talking about an easy transition based on history. Now maybe there's some magic, but is that the thing that people should be asking for? What I try to get people who listeners is like, what's their responsibility here? I mean, so should they be like telling their congressperson, don't vote for a budget if it doesn't have, X amount of dollars for our kids, or, they got rid of the Department of Education, they moved the Department of Education around. Should we be trying to get rules in place to make sure our kids, how do you envision us taking advantage of this?
Sure. I think you're asking me, how do you concretize and operationalize some of these ideas so that we can have our petitions known to, or air our grievances, right? A lobby, essentially, which is having our petitions known to the lawmakers in Congress. And I think you're right. Education is a big part of that. Making sure that there is money set aside for historically disadvantaged institutions, be they PWIs that are in Appalachia and so on and so forth, and then obviously HBCU, since the focus of our conversation and our audience is talking about the impact in African Americans. But one of the issues we'll find now, and that's why I put in the PWI piece as well, is that the president has a very expansive view on matters, and it's no longer the situation whereas in prior Congresses and other administrations, you could ask for centers of excellence at HBCUs and not do the same for other institutions. That's not the political reality that we have. And that's fine, but we're focusing upon the Black community. So education is one piece. And then I think if we putting in guardrails and modalities again to make lending requirements, make it so that the founders who are in these nascent professions and industries can get the access to capital to scale up and one day be an open AI, because there are a number of Black AI platforms and coders out there. Most people don't know about them. There's a proliferation of AI platforms, which is why I shared earlier. There's also a consolidation of many of them. But let's allow these nascent companies to innovate and flourish and invest in them, which can be done directly through the government, which can also be done through allowing them easier access to capital. And also requiring, and like WIOA, for example.
You said WIOA?
WIOA, WOIA, which basically helps. I forget what the acronym stands for. I have to Google that again. But the issue there is it helps retrain people with apprenticeships, right? So that's one of the things in prior administrations. We talked about apprenticeships. You had mentioned vocational schools. You had also mentioned 2-year college programs, et cetera. Yeah, college is expensive. And so fundamentally, the problems that we have in the Black community, as I said, AI is going to exacerbate them because the problems are structural. They didn't just start now. Right. They've been historically entrenched and have been around for centuries, since Reconstruction, since emancipation. Yeah. And so AI is going to exacerbate them, but exacerbate them at a much quicker and more efficient clip. And so ways to mitigate against that is to ask for, the change to investments in schools and education systems, to request and require, demand apprenticeships in these forward professions and vocations, and not just in programming. There's opportunities with, and the data centers, for example, we didn't talk about that. That's a huge opportunity to invest in data centers, and an opportunity for people to be trained in how to lay the wiring and all the infrastructure that goes along. We see the computer, we use the computer, but there's also infrastructure underground that goes on that requires technical skills. So there still will be a need for people at every rung of the ladder, whether it's white collar, blue collar, et cetera, to have a seat at the table. But I think we have to demand and be forward thinking about what that looks like for us.
Yeah, we've seen data says that there's about a 1.5 million support jobs for data centers, from plumbing to HVAC, everything else. Which I totally agree, but we're not structured, we're not set up to take advantage of that process, which is why I think as we were talking. And something else I wanted to bring up, which applies to every issue we cover. This is not, AI is just hot in the future, so we need to get a handle on it. And I want to actually jump to energy and water, but before we get to that, I want to finish this part about the workforce. Is that these people are being sued. All these schools are being sued for anti-discrimination or anti-affirmative action stuff. They've been sued relentlessly. Harvard was a major thing. Now, how many African-American Harvard grads do you know or heard of? And through all this stuff, none of them even complained once about this whole process. None of them. You talk about investing in ourselves. None of them spent money on lawyers. None of them spent money. And presumably these are the brightest and most, well endowed people in our networks, and they couldn't fight on a simple fight like just discrimination versus something more complicated like this investment in AI. So I guess I'm really asking you, Arthur, for a question you don't have the answer to, but is where are we going to go with this? This all sounds great. Those are all ideas. It's like in football, if you can get 4 yards on first down, run the ball, then you have a chance to get, but that hardly ever happens. So that's, I guess, what I'm having trouble kind of circle I'm trying to square.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's a circle we square not just in conversations about AI. I'm extrapolating upon my upon the field of which we're talking, but I think it's a problem that has been endemic to the way we've been thinking about all of these issues before, which you've mentioned. So we're talking about AI. It's a problem here. It's also a problem with financial services and other areas that you focused upon. And fundamentally, it's an issue that we have to retool our mind on thinking about and look at, ask the question, how can we take advantage of this moment? Ask ourselves. So I've given you opportunities and ideas, but we have to ask ourselves and then have the agency to follow through with it. So as I mentioned, investing and supporting founders. It doesn't take, you don't have to be a white collar person to do that. You don't have to be a blue collar person to do it. You have to have someone that has obviously means, but there isn't a level on whether you're rich or poor or anything like that, but it is to make sure that we have our own communities that are thriving in this space. As I mentioned, there are other global actors that are involved. You've got a few European startups in this space, and as there are African startups too, but we have to nurture them. We've got to nurture the startups in the Black community in this space. And so I think that, again, is a shift. It's a tangible shift in how we spend our money. We're going to spend the money. So what if we decided, hey, I'm still going to spend, but let me spend X percent on something that is going to be future thinking, more foolproof, and that may pay dividends in the short term, which I think it will, and the intermediate term and the long term. And so, even investing now, there's a huge upside. I'm not here to talk about, financial opportunities in that regard. You're going to get this amount of return, but you see the headlines every day as to what's happening with these companies. There's a prodigious amount of resources that are being given back and forth to the companies and so on and so forth. There is no reason why, even at whatever scale we're able to, that Black communities, we shouldn't be taking advantage of that.
So I haven't beaten that horse to death, but I will give you a break from that. We'll switch to a different part of this conversation, which I think is also really interesting, like the environmental impact. So we've been reading stories about electricity bills going up for people because data centers are drawing a lot of power. So the demand on the power is causing people's light bills to go up. Same with water. These data centers require huge amounts of cooling capacity, so they draw a lot of water as well. People are worried the community colors, which already suffer from cancer alleys, et cetera, are going to take the brunt of this development. I'm not speaking out of school. I say that one of our colleagues in North Carolina, out of the Roanoke Rapids SCLC chapter, actually, one of the former mayors, actually went and testified at a hearing about this, about making sure they more fairly divide up the pain of data centers, that they more equitably place them around the country, so they're not heavily placed in areas that are underserved. What are you seeing in the space, and is that one of the other things we should be asking Congress to make sure when we set up policies that these policies do take that kind of stuff into account?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, not only at just the congressional level, and as I shared, the Congress is not really acting in the AI space yet. The White House is implementing these executive orders, which we talked about not having the force of law. And so the real action is at the state level, and that's really all politics is local. If there is a data center in my neighborhood here in DC, I'm not going to petition my member. Well, we don't have a member in DC, right? Well, none that can, non-voting member. But the issue is that,
not a real member.
Well, I didn't say that, but the issue is that it's a local thing, right? And so that's why I mentioned that's one of the it's a 5-legged stool. That's one of the legs of the stool that we have to do too. And so when we talked about the training issue, it's not just pie in the sky and a nice thing to say. I think when it comes to training, unemployment and training, local training programs, that's all at your state level. Mm-hmm. And so there you have to petition for training. There's a number of training programs already for infrastructure development, some computer training. But you're right. In DC, which I'm a resident here, there is no AI training that will get you an AI, oriented type job. And so you have to petition that. So you have to be aware and informed as voting citizenry, and then figure out where your pain point is, what you think you're missing, and then you have to be outspoken about it. And it doesn't take any particular skill to petition the government, whether it's federal or state. It helps if you have a lobbyist or someone who could maybe more polished if you have some trepidation, but anyone can avail themselves, right, of going into a member's office, whether again at the state or federal level. But you have to know what you want.
Article 1 of the Constitution guarantees you that right.
That's right. But it goes back to what you had mentioned earlier. You have to know what your petition and what your demand is. Okay. And so getting back to the location of data centers in poor and Black and other minority communities. Yeah, as I mentioned, our society still has entrenched problems. AI is not going to fix those. That is an issue about redlining, about environmental racism, all the other things that have been extant outside of AI. We still have to agitate for. As Dr. Steele would say, you've got to agitate. Yep. I would say do it in a way that makes sense. So now you're agitating at the federal level, you're putting pressure there. You're agitating at the state level where your interests can be most quickly felt because it's in your neighborhood, it's in your hood, it's in your backyard. And then enlisting the help of others who can then multiply your voice. When I say yours, it can be mine singularly as Arthur Sidney, or me and you and 3 of our best friends, but availing ourselves to those civic organizations, as I shared in the beginning. And they can also help you concretize and think about, ways to frame your petitions to the policymakers. And then even beyond that, as I share, we don't often talk about it, elevating the concerns to an international level, because the issues that we have as Black and brown people in this country are the same issues that people are having around the world in the global South. It is not, we are not alone in this. And it's not just AI. These are the same modalities and the same problems that we have in any sector. Right. And I think we're talking about AI because it's the new shiny thing. It's the new, it not only is a new shiny thing, it is an opportunity for a boon. Right. And the conversation is important because we want to make sure our communities don't end up with a bust. So I get it. And then, like I said, the investment is a piece. So we don't often talk about that. And that's one of not in our conversations, but that's undergirding what you do at FSIC and everything else you deal with. We cannot abdicate our responsibility for trying to own some of the means of the production here. And it's easier now at the incipient stage, right? So we're talking about cannabis. Cannabis has been out, I don't know what the aphorism is, that bull or whatever has left the barn, whatever, a long time ago, right? And so AI has been around for over 40 plus years. Some would even argue longer than that. It's the automation of these decisions at a rapid pace. That's really all it is. It is now becoming more sophisticated. We're talking about going into the future with sentient AI, where AI can think and feel. There's new iterations of, some platforms where they explain how they're thinking and why they're thinking, and then it's like a choose your own adventure book. You can choose one of 3 answers to the problem you're trying to solve for.
I heard that the singularity, they're not predicting the singularity could happen as soon as 2030.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of ambition, there's a lot of investment going on, and yes, the people are investing for all of these things to come sooner rather than later. I am loath to again look to my crystal ball and see when this is going to happen, but you see that people are thinking about having AI work even more effectively. And then there's also the piece with robotics, right? So that's even more forward thinking, where now you have not just me sitting at a computer doing something, but now robots interacting and maneuvering vis-a-vis some other stimuli in real time. So that's like a Buck Rogers kind of a world. But we are headed slowly in that way, where we're going to have robotics and sentient thinking, etc. It's just a matter of how close we'll get. But the important thing is, at the base of all of this, to your point, Kevin, is the human element. So AI is not so sentient where it doesn't need data. Right. And that is the important thing. And so part of the problem when it comes to bias, discrimination, disparate impact for our communities is who's putting the data in, who's testing the data, and is anyone doing any audits of the data? Is anyone doing, as I mentioned before, risk assessments? And those are all critically important. And the democratization of input, which goes back to the training, the access, and the resources. We, as people of color, should also be putting in the information so that it reflects our viewpoint, our thought processes. I
want to interrupt you. Don't lose train of thought stuff, but I do want to throw this piece in there. We've seen AI go so far. Like 5-6 years ago, we wrote a white paper on AI in lending and AI underwriting, right? And then a couple years later, after that, we wrote one on facial recognition, AI and facial recognition, and minorities. And just the conversation has gone leaps and bounds since in that short time. I mean, the conversation we have now, it's almost irrelevant to the conversation we had 5 or 6 years ago. So it's really interesting. But go ahead.
No, it's interesting, and I still think there are problems when it comes to it. When it comes to the screenings with the resumes and free PO job applicants, when it comes to people that are applying for mortgages, the redlining, et cetera, because of the data, a lot of the data that's in there. If it's got bad data in, bad data is going to come out. Or if the model is trained to look for something, given someone's proclivity, then it's going to look for something. And it's going to weed out people. And so I think that we ought to move for and request a democratization of access, because once we can start inputting data, we have more control and an ability to level set with on the data that's inputted into these models. And that's critically important for our communities. It can't be data that's inputted by, white men.
Right.
And so, largely, white men have been trained in these sciences, right, and how to do AI. Not to say that can't change, and I think we ought to be looking consciously to moving into those sectors. For so often we've had conversations about the need for African Americans to move into STEM and STEAM, and it's not hot air. It's something we need to do, right? Because everything from 20 years beyond or 30 years ago, that's it's not just a mantra. That's what you need to be successful. In addition to the lawyers and everyone else, we have to have a concerted effort as a community to move into those more technical areas.
So let me ask you: you were just in Africa, the African countries, you said they're in some ways they're ahead, like some of the policies. Are they ahead in the development, like the economic development, the investment? I mean, where do they stand? What do you see as the future? What can we learn from them?
Yeah, that's a great question. And so there's not many data centers in Africa. They are actually clamoring to get them. There's a lot of investment from the very top tech companies in Africa to develop the youth there, and also to get ideas from the continent. And so Africa is still behind the 8 ball rather, when it comes to infrastructure. As you mentioned, when I was in Uganda, there were many of the students were like, oh, we're talking about these things. We want data centers. But I also shared with them, be careful what you're asking for, because of the other attendant, bad effects of data centers. If you can get a data center somewhere else that's not in your backyard, you're better off, obviously. Right. But yes, they do feel the need for, for the infrastructure, for the broadband deployment, all the things that affect, again, communities here in this country. They also face, but infrastructure is extremely important. And also the model for data centers will have to be changed. I'm not a data center expert, but obviously I do know that they generate a lot of heat and pollution. And so there's, sub-Saharan Africa, there's Africa on the equator, right? And so it's hot. Right? So it's going to require a lot of cooling and different methods than, say, a data center here in Ashburn, Virginia, where there's a proliferation, right? And not so near in Northern Virginia, there's a proliferation of data centers. There, the concerns in Africa will be a little bit different. Certain localities are more equipped than others. For example, Uganda has it's more temperate, and they also have water. They don't have the same water problems as, say, parts of Kenya or other parts of the continent. And so I think going forward, the placement of the data centers will have to be done in very selective localities where it's not going to be a drain on people and their resources, their water resources, their electrical resources.
Let me ask you a question. Sure. Why are they so keen on getting data centers? Because they don't provide a lot of jobs. Data centers are not people-intensive operations. So what is their mindset?
The idea is that one of the concerns is historically they felt they've been left behind when it comes to world development, et cetera, when it comes to the Western financial institutions and the like. And so they don't want to miss that opportunity. And they believe that having the data centers will allow faster compute times, allow, frontier computing, all kinds of things that will help them, because the students are really serious. When you go to the universities in Uganda, the students are studying AI from a practical standpoint, how to program, how to code, and they want the power and the means that that they believe we have here, so they can do things more efficiently, and so that the continent and the countries themselves will be taken more seriously when it comes to foreign direct investment from the big tech companies and the like.
We talked about international a little bit, like you touched on, like the UN or whatever. My International Monetary Fund, are any of those institutions looking to invest or set up to invest more in AI opportunities in Africa or the global South?
There are discussions on frameworks at those institutions, and I know that the private companies are looking to do investments in Africa. So that I know for a fact. Is undergoing and underway now, because these companies realize the youth component, all these massive students that are trained, and that will have a longevity. Again, they're well under 40 years old. They're young. I mean, they're like, I don't know, 14, 25. So they see the potential there, and they want to harness that. And they're sharp minds. I mean, these are young people. They've grown up with technology. You and I have grown up with technology, but how the successive generations, and now it's been at least three generations, right? We had the dial-up modems and AOL and everything.
Right.
Everything is catapulted way far ahead of that, and just even how younger people use social media, all the things that we have seen develop. So we're not that antiquarian or dinosaurs where we it happened late in our life. We kind of grew up with it.
Right.
But nevertheless, the way we use it is a far cry different from, the children and the children's children,
Right.
how they use it. And so Africa is no different. The individuals that have access to, the computers and the computer labs, which mind you, again, goes back to your issue, the same problem we have at HBCUs, having adequate, computers and computer labs when vis-a-vis PWI institutions, there's a gulf, right? And so that goes with appropriations, and it goes with, again, us calling and demanding for a level of education that suits not just jobs, but jobs for the future, right? The new collar, as I've just coined tonight. I don't think anyone said that before, right?
Arthur, you created a whole new paradigm. Look at that.
Well, that's really what we're looking at. I mean, that's why we're having this conversation. That's why it's so prescient. That's why it's so important. And we're not going to solve it all tonight, because the other question is, too, when things go wrong. So we talked about from a Black standpoint. Now, what about when things go wrong? Who pays?
Right.
Who do I go after?
Yeah.
What if someone takes, if I make a beautiful R&B song tonight using one of the platforms and I put it online, it's now mine, and someone takes it and pilfers my intellectual property, who do I sue? Right. So there's a lot of unanswered questions that are still growing with this, with the development and scaling of AI. But the important thing is, we still have an opportunity to get on the train, and I hate to throw around old cliches, but to really have a seat at the table before we won't even be on the menu. We'll just get left off the table. We won't even get any scraps.
Won't even get to the restaurant.
We'll never get to the restaurant. We'll never get to the entree, and we'll certainly never have dessert.
So give me 5 things. Concrete things, so you and I both have worked on the Hill. Both of us have lobbied. If I were looking at this and I thought I need to have a policy recommendation to make sure Black people aren't left out of this process, tell me the 5 things I would want to ask for, whether they be state, local, whatever level, or individual investors, or all those things, international, whatever. But what are the 4 or 5 things that should be in my proposal?
Yeah, I think the whole theme is, again, because it's about opportunity, power, and access. That's really what we're talking about. I think that we need to democratize access to these tools, one, and then democratize the outputs and so on. But I think concretely, what we need to do is agitate for workforce development in these areas at the state level. We need to ask for funding for HBCUs so that they have adequate computer labs and training labs, that they have teachers that are equipped to teach these jobs for the future. At the federal level, that we advocate for a real floor, not through executive orders, but petition the Congress to act, which has been we've not been successful in other areas like like privacy, for example, which is critically important. So Europe has an AI Act, right? Mm-hmm. The EU has the AI Act, and the UK has its similar corollary. They also have a privacy law, right? GDPR. We don't have a uniform privacy law, and so in that federal package, we can ensure that there are guardrails against discrimination, again, democratization, funding and investment, almost crowdfunding. There are a myriad of ideas that would help us, that could go into the bill, and that would help not just Black folk, but people that are subject to getting left behind in this new revolution. Those are some concrete things. Investment, as I shared, all very concrete.
Like I said, we were not going to solve this all tonight, but I did want to, I think one thing I would add that people definitely need to, and this is true across the board. I anyone who listens to the show with any regularity knows my biggest thing is that we have to be part of the advocacy. We have to exercise our first Article 1 rights of redressing the government for redress of our grievances.
Right.
So that being said, all these things from the development of the technology to the development of the data centers to the placement to the environment, all those things to the workforce requires a level of responsible citizenship on behalf of on our part. And so this is a good conversation, Arthur. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. I always enjoy the time that you take. You always have thoughtful conversations and thoughtful questions, whether on the podcast or off. So I really count it as an honor to share some of my thinking on these matters. And you're right; these ideas are still developed. All the problems will not be solved in our 1 hour, even if we had 2 hours of conversation. But I do think it's important that we really think critically, because it's a tremendous opportunity, and there are some risks. It's all, as I said, it's all not the yellow brick road or Valhalla or wonderful. But I think there will be changes. There is some displacement that happens with any revolution, but it's incumbent upon us to use the tools at our disposal to make sure that we get access to the tools and we use them for our benefit. There's no way, we talk about having access to the middle class. There's no reason why anyone, myself, anybody, why you can't code something and sell it, and make money. I mean, even at the most basic level, right? Just what's in it for me. Right. You can use these tools to do really, really powerful things that you wouldn't be able to do on your own. Yeah. Again, we talked about not having having an expensive education or degree, a master's of science and computer science. You can get on one of the platforms and develop an app and tell it what you want the app to do, and it will develop it for you. Yeah. Then you can monetize that. I mean, that is a pedantic and smaller. It's on a smaller scale, but a lot of the issues are about, as I mentioned, access and then capital, right? Once you have means, then you're able to invest in others and do a whole host of other things, right? If I'm able to pay for my dinner, I'm able to think more about, other things, right? But if I can't eat and I'm staying up all night worrying how I'm going to get food, then I can't think about how to get to the next level, right? It's just basic with humans anywhere. Yeah. And so I think we really need to take advantage of this. There have been so many waves in our lifetime, whether it's, again, the revolutions as they were, hip hop revolution. This is an opportunity where we can all equally get access. Insofar as you have a computer, you've got internet, you are able to do something positive for your community, for yourself, and make some real change.
Good words to end on, Arthur. Thanks a lot for coming on.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. I enjoyed it, and I look forward to talking with you soon.
We'll probably